That was the title track from the famous Duke Ellington album, Afrobossa. Not only is it an excellent workout for your system, but also a wonderfully recorded album that I'd thoroughly urge you to check out. Welcome to A British Audiophile in this first episode of this year, so Happy New Year. And it's true what they say, if you hang on to something long enough, eventually it will come back in fashion. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is a Technics SE M100 amplifier from 1989. It's a fully featured amplifier with a built-in DAC. This is a modern equivalent, the Hegel H160 that I reviewed in a previous episode, also a fully featured amplifier with a built-in DAC. Now what I'll be doing is making a comparison between the two. Now, is it a fair comparison? Well, let's look at price. The Hegel H160 retails for £2,500. This Technics amplifier back in 1989 retailed for £1,000. Now, if you account for inflation and look at Technics and Yamaha and similar other Japanese producers and their current lineup, I think you could argue that this amplifier today would sell somewhere between £1,500 and £2,000, perhaps closer to the £1,500 mark, if I'm being honest. They also have a number of other similarities. They both weigh 17 kgs, they both produce over 100 watts of power, 150 watts in the case of the Hegel and 120 watts in the case of this Technics, and they all are fully featured amplifiers with built-in DACs. Even adjusting for inflation, this is not a fair comparison. The Hegel H160 at £2,500 should comfortably outperform this Technics, even if it was being produced today for £1,500. But I've also had the H90 here to audition. Now I had to return that before I could make a formal review, but I do recall what that sounds like. The H90 retails for £1,500, and today this would be a direct competitor to that amplifier. So the question really remains, how much has the game moved on in 30 years? Well, I'll be answering that. I'll be looking at comparing this Technics amplifier to the H90, to the H160 and other amplifiers that I own. But I'd also like to give you a little bit of context in terms of the review of this Technics amplifier. The heyday of Technics was the 1970s and 1980s, where they produced amplifiers and receivers that were very sought after and are still very sought after today, especially the ones with the VU meters at the front. Now they can retail for many thousands of pounds. So are people being foolish buying those amplifiers? Are they just being nostalgic? Or are they genuinely very good amplifiers that stand up very well in comparisons with amplifiers produced today? Well, let's find out. Okay, so before we do the sound comparisons, let's take a closer look at this amplifier. Technics Digital Power Amplifier SE M100. There was a matching preamplifier if you wanted a phono stage in extra line level audio connections, but this can be used as a fully featured integrated amplifier, as I mentioned earlier. Bottom left you have a power button, then a headphone jack and a selector switch for A and B speaker connections. In the center you have rather nice, large, very smooth potentiometer as a volume control, and these are your digital input connections for optical and coax. It predates the USB type of connection, as I'll show you on the back, and it has an input selector there for your digital inputs. Switch it over to variable, that's your traditional line level analog output, and if you want to use it as a power amplifier you can switch it over to fixed. Digital direct drive, 4 DAC chips working in unison to provide you 20 bits worth of resolution, which was state of the art at the time. And that digital direct drive means that the DAC feeds directly into the power amplifier, and signal is attenuated digitally, so you bypass the preamp effectively. Class AA, that is their proprietary take on class AB. I think it has, from what I can read up on, from what I understand, class A voltage gain stage and a class B current driving stage, and the class AA is a bridge that sits in between the two. Not quite sure how that works. Maybe someone can enlighten me. We'll get to the insides in a second. Let's just spin this round. And what you have is your A and B speaker connections, no banana plugs, just bare wire connections going in there. Banana plugs would have been nice, but I don't think that was the forte in that time, in that day and age. There are your digital input connections. You've got coax and 2 optical, and your fixed and variable line level connections. That's the other side of the speaker connections for A and B. If I zoom back out, you might be able to see the whole thing. There you go. It is quite a beast if you look inside. What's really impressive is it's a dual mono design that goes all the way back to the power connection with separate transformers. Normally when you have a dual mono design, you'll have them sharing one power transformer, but you can see there's one on the left hand side here and one on the right hand side. And in the middle is the preamplifier and the DAC, which is very well encased, top and bottom. And you've got these copper shield, I think they're for shielding because it's a copper plate on the back, and surrounds the digital preamp, so there's no noise coming through from the power amplifier sections. Very well shielded, and if you lifted that cover off underneath there, you would find the DAC. Quite large heat sinks, 2 reasonably sized filter caps for the power supply, and underneath there, if I can just get there somehow, get an angle where you can see perhaps, is the fully discrete amplifier module, and it's exactly the same on the other side. So quite a beast really. Even by today's standards, you'd have to spend, I mean, if you're looking at the Hegel H90, you go, that's where it starts to go to dual mono, that's £5,000, and that doesn't have independent power supplies and transformers for the left and right amplifier modules. This does. So it's effectively 2 mono blocks, preamplifier and DAC, squeezed into one chassis. Very impressively built. And certainly a lot of value for the money back in that day and even by today's standards. Just get back round the front here, see if there's any other angles I can exploit. Not really to get much in. I'm not going to pull this thing apart any further, so yeah, highly impressive. I said I wasn't going to pull it apart any further, but I couldn't resist, so I took off the top cover, and there is the digital preamp effectively and DAC. Now what you'll notice is that it's fully discrete. There are a number of ICs as well. I have a feeling there in the middle are the 4 DAC chips, but that's your digital inputs coming in there. So Yamaha IC. I haven't had a look at the schematics, so I'm not quite sure what these are all for, but very well laid out circuit board. All those resistors and capacitors are fully discrete. I think those are your 4 DAC chips, working to give you that 20-bit resolution, which is, even by today's standards, exceptional. A couple of, I think, Technics own branded electrolytic caps, and I've also taken the cover off the top of the amplifier module, and that's Technics own branded. I don't know if I can see it there.
There you go. And it's 10,000 microfarads a piece. So that's 20,000 microfarads on this side. Exactly the same on the other side, 40,000 microfarads. Some nice caps down there in the white that you can see in the corner. And a fully discrete amplifier module. The output transistors, you've got 4 of them there, and 2 are green and 2 are black, so I don't know why they're not exactly the same. They look like they're original. I don't think anything's been replaced in this. So yeah, well done Technics. In terms of build quality, superb amplifier.
Good build quality is no guarantee of good sound quality. So what does this 30-year-old Technics SE M100 amplifier sound like? Well, it has that typical Japanese mid-fi V-shaped tonal characteristic where the very low frequencies and the very high frequencies are just ever so slightly overemphasized. The bass is the star of the show here. Bass frequencies are well extended, they're tight, they're articulate, they're very fast. And in this regard, not only do I prefer it to the H90 amplifier that I had here for audition, but also to my H160 Hegel amplifier. It'll give my exposure 21 preamp and 18 monoblocks a good run for its money, and that's a considerably more expensive amplifier than this Technics. Mid-bass is also excellent. The rhythm section, it's like this amplifier gets hold of a rhythm and just doesn't let go. It makes it really fun, very engaging to listen to. It's delivered with great impact, great authority and great speed. So all excellent news thus far. Well, this is where the picture gets a little less rosy. In the mid-range, it really doesn't compete with any of those amplifiers. The resolution is not quite as good. The separation between instruments is not as good. It's like everything's a little bit more muddled together. It's not bad by any characteristics, it's just if you put them on the end of very revealing speakers. Now bear in mind the Product Response 1 SEs that I have behind me are extremely revealing in the mid-range. They're probably, quite possibly actually, one of the most revealing speakers that are around in terms of mid-range clarity. So partnered perhaps with something more appropriate to its price point in terms of mid-range clarity, I don't think those characteristics will be so evident, but it certainly isn't as good as any of those amplifiers that I mentioned, the H90, the H160, the exposures that I have, and even my Audiolab QDAC and M-Power have better resolution, better definition, better separation in the mid-range than this amplifier. It has a slight steely quality to the mid-range as well in the upper mids, which gives guitars and sometimes some vocals a little bit of glare, and that becomes evident when you're partnering it, like I say, with extremely revealing speakers. High frequencies are very well extended, their sibilance is very well controlled, so no complaints in the top end there. So overall, partnered with the right kind of speakers, I think this is an excellent amplifier with a huge amount of power, clearly in reserve, which makes a lot of fun to listen to. So the questions I asked myself at the beginning of this review were, how does this amplifier compete with its modern day equivalents? And how much has the game moved on in 30 years? Well, let's deal with how it competes first. And let's assume that this was an amplifier being built today for £1,500. Well, in some regards, it would compete very well. In terms of build quality, I think you'd be hard pressed to find any amplifier at £1,500 with a dual mono construction, 2 separate power transformers, effectively 2 mono blocks built into a chassis with a DAC and a preamp at this kind of price point. And I think that also shows itself in this amplifier's rather exceptional bass response. But in terms of resolution and detail, this particular amplifier doesn't compete with its modern day counterparts. Now that's true of this amplifier, it's not true of all vintage amplifiers. My exposure 21 pre and 18 monos I've referred to in previous reviews as 25 years old. Well, I actually looked it up and opened the lid. They're 22 years old and they could be considered a vintage amplifier. They retailed for about £3,000, and even if you account for them going up in inflation being £4,000 or £5,000 today, they comfortably saw off the Hegel H160 in terms of resolution and detail. So, as I say, you can't make generalizations based on one particular amplifier. And also, I don't know whether this amplifier has any faults in it. It's never been serviced. I don't know if there's any capacitors that have dried up and are out of spec. And I will be sending it to my local dealer, who are excellent in terms of servicing amplifiers, and they'll give it an overhaul. And if there's any capacitors that need replacing, which I suspect there might be, they'll do that. And I'll have a listen when it comes back. If it sounds any different, I'll certainly be doing an update on this review. Serviced or not serviced, used amplifiers from 20-30 years ago can represent excellent value if you buy them second hand. But you have to be careful and you have to be sensible. You have to pick something that fits well with your system, and in particular your speakers, in terms of its tonal characteristics and its resolution. And you have to buy from a reliable source so that you can avoid problems. This amplifier you probably pick up second hand for £300, and trust me, there's nothing new that you can buy for £300 that's anywhere close to this, not even for £500-600. So as long as you're sensible and careful and pick the right amplifier, used amplifiers for 20-30 years ago can be a relative bargain. So how has the game moved on in the last 30 years? Well, I can't use this one example of a 30-year-old Technics amplifier to judge all vintage amplifiers any more than I can use my Hegel H160 to judge all modern amplifiers. But I have listened to a lot more than 2 amplifiers over the last 20-30 years. So this is purely my subjective take on where I think things have evolved and how the game has moved on. In terms of topology, Class D amplifiers have become more and more popular. That's a topology where we're starting to figure out how to make those amplifiers sound better and better and deal with some of the problems with regards to load intolerance and filtering out the noise that those amplifiers, switching amplifiers, produce. But the vast majority of amplifiers out there are still Class A-B designs, which have been around for an awful long time. That topology has hardly changed at all. As a result, Class A-B amplifiers, which are really good back 20-30 years ago, are still very competitive today, as long as you choose wisely. Now, I think the reality is that there have been a lot of refinements in terms of how that Class A-B technology is implemented. So where you're probably more likely to find a 20-30-year-old amplifier with obvious flaws, you're less likely to find that to be the case, because they've just figured out, like they are doing with Class D, how to basically get around some of those problems, for example, crossover distortion and lowering the noise floor. Now, one of the reasons why it's possible to produce an amplifier today much more easily with less sonic faults and a lower noise floor than 20-30 years ago is not only about refining the art, but also about the fact that technology has improved over the last 20-30 years. So the precision and tolerance of components going into this amplifier, resistors, capacitors, inductors and like, are far better than they were 20-30 years ago. And as a result, it's much easier to get something that produces a much more consistent result. So, like most things in this hobby, there are pluses and minuses to buying new and used, and one of the other benefits of new amplifiers are that you have manufacturer warranty and manufacturer support, but used is also a very viable option. So no black and white answers here, just shades of grey. Hopefully you've found this review useful and you've enjoyed it, and if you enjoy my approach to hi-fi, please consider subscribing to this channel if you haven't already. Please think about liking and sharing this video. It certainly helps in terms of promoting this channel and helping it to grow. So I appreciate your support, And for today, for now, a British audiophile signing off.